Thank you very, very much. I want to thank Arnie Harris. A pleasure to meet him. Ramah has had a long and distinguished time with all kinds of gifted leaders, and I'm happy to see that this continues to this day. Also want to thank David Soloff and Lauren Sykes, who helped make this possible and responded to the possibility that I might be here today. I agree that the Merchandise Mart is a special place in my memory. On many occasions, I used to come here and meet and have lunch with Lou Weiner, right? Aside from our larger meetings and discuss matters of significance to the camp. I have to tell you that I claim my relationship to Ramah really formally ended almost 20 years ago. So I claim no special knowledge of what took place in the last 20 years. Not that I haven't been very interested in what took place at Ramah. I read always with great interest any piece of public relations material. I talked to my son, who has become very actively involved in the camp. I talked to my grandson, who is a current camper, and this summer, for the first time, I have a granddaughter who will be going to the Ramah day camp in Nyack, New York, and can't wait until she is able to be a camper at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires. They live in New York City. You know, I was asked, you know, to tell stories. I'm not a good one for remembering stories, I have to tell you. I never kept a diary of my experience within Ramah, though I remember very well people who are here today, those who were campers and staff members during my administration at camp. I did spend a lot of time thinking about Ramah over the years and in writing about Ramah in the books, the book that the mayor mentioned. Rabbi Alexander Shapiro and I wrote a book in honor of Louis Newman, who was a very significant director of the camp for a period of 3 years from 1951 to 1953. I also participated in 2 other volumes that the National Ramah Commission wrote about the history of Ramah at different times, and have an article also. There was 2 books were published, unfortunately, after his death, in honor of Seymour Fox, and have an interesting article there. Also, I'm very proud that in the Encyclopedia Judaica, 2nd edition, not in the first edition of the Encyclopedia Judaica, they didn't think to have an article about Jewish camping. But by the time they came 20 or 25 years later to publish a 2nd edition, they thought that that was necessary, and I was called upon to write that article about Jewish camping. So if you ever are near a set of the Encyclopedia Judaica 2nd edition and look up Jewish camping, you'll see the article that I wrote there. So again, didn't deal perhaps and don't recall a lot of little things that happened, but there are larger trends that I tried to follow. I'm certainly interested in your memories, and anything that would jar my memory is very welcome. David Soloff asked me about the name Ramah. I collected many materials, and when we moved from our home in Woodmere 3 years ago, I left those materials in the possession of the National Ramah office. And among the papers there is the first announcement of Camp Ramah. That is, it was the brochure sent out to encourage families to send their children to Camp Ramah in Wisconsin. But the name there is not Camp Ramah. The name there says, send your children to Camp Kinneret, it says. And what happened was, I was told, it turned out that Camp Kinneret was somebody else's. It belonged to some, I think, must have been a private Jewish camp, Camp Kinneret. And so the people at the seminary who were involved in the founding of Ramah had to find another name. Now, the only hint that I have as to why they picked the name Ramah appears in one of those early movies, which I hope that the camp office has a copy of, which was narrated by Dr. Judah Golden. It was a promotional film about Ramah, and Judah Golden says, quote, "This is Ramah, the place where the prophet Samuel lived," right? So for some reason they picked out this name, Camp Ramah, because Samuel lived there. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's what it is.
His last name was Melvin. No.
Right. I remember very well coming to Ramah that first year with Mayor. I don't think there's anybody else in the room who was with us in 1947 at camp, and it was pretty rough and crude. For example, they had only weeks before cleared the fields. I mean, you've been there, you know, it's in the middle of a forest. So that they had cleared the fields with bulldozers, whatever, and in order to play, we couldn't play baseball because there were stones, pebbles all over the field. And so for the first week, before we could play baseball at the camp, we had to collect pebbles, pick up the pebbles off the field in order to make it suitable for us to play. There were all kinds of occasions. I mean, you may be aware that the camp did not have electricity from a grid. It had not extended as far as the camp, the grid, and so the camp had generators on which it depended. I believe today the camp has emergency generators, but in those days the generators were the power that powered the electricity that we had in camp, and on numerous occasions during the summer it failed. The camp did have a telephone because the camp decided that that was essential, and before the summer the camp paid the Wisconsin Telephone Company to extend its line. I don't know, from wouldn't be all the way from Conover, which was 7 miles, but probably a little closer, to extend it to the camp. There were occasions where I remember the kitchen staff walked out. The kitchen staff were all local people, and where the staff walked out. So there were plenty of problems. But the one very clear occasion that I remember, and I kept in mind over the years, was once when some of these hardships occurred, that Henry Goldberg, who was the camp director, sat us all down on the key card to talk to us, you know, in order to kind of, you know, encourage us, you know, that we shouldn't give up, you know, that we're doing something important and good. And he said, you know, you look around, you see that the buildings are not so great and so simple. One day, all of the buildings in this camp will have golden doorknobs. I mean, those were his exact words.
You could have said a light bulb.
Right? He said golden doorknobs, and I believe that Baruch Hashem, right, with the help of the camp committee and the families of the campers, that after all these years, Camp Ramah does have golden doorknobs. It is a beautiful facility, and in no way compares to that simple fishing village, fisherman's resort to which we came. Right? The original name of it was Buckatabbin Lodge. That was Buckatabbin Lodge, right? A place that had no private washrooms, right? I think other than originally in the house which was the business office. I don't. Is it still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. The business office. That's probably where the owner of Buckatabbin Lodge lived. There were communal washrooms, latrines, right, that one for the men and one for the women that we used. For your information, the first private washroom, the first additional washroom that was ever built, was built because of for a professor who came to camp. That the Jewish Theological Seminary sent a member of its faculty to the camp every year to be the professor in residence. And in one of the early summers, they sent the great scholar, Professor Shalom Spiegel. And Professor Spiegel and his wife were already rather elderly at the time. And they certainly would not have come to the camp if the camp did not have private facilities for them. I would say semi-private. Right? So that in that bunk, right, it was the bunk that a staff building that is today the site of the Merkaz Tarbut, the cultural center in the middle of the camp. There was a staff building there, and that washroom was installed there, right? I say semi-private because even Professor Spiegel had to live, you know, it had doors to both sides, right? And that was the situation of that. I also remember very clearly Mort Steinberg, who rose from camper to Rosh Mayim, that Mort Steinberg told me very firmly that the camp needed a swimming pool, right? And he even showed me the place. I remember he showed me on the key car where that swimming pool ought to be built, right? But somehow his dream has never been realized to this day.
Right? In Rome, it's been realized.
In Rome, right? Right. Camp Ramah in Connecticut had a pool, right? And of course, the Ramah Day Camp has a pool. So there is a pool connected to Camp Ramah in Wisconsin. I remember I remember one of those misadvents was before we used to come up to camp with the staff for the orientation period, and then I and the assistant to the director would go back to Chicago the day before the campers were to come up so that we could be with the campers on the trip up to camp. And in this particular year, it was my good friend Chaim Rogoff was the assistant to the director, and I relied on him unquestionably, you know. So when he arranged for our transportation to the Rhinelander airport, and he told me what time to go, and we went, and I remember as we got to the airport and got out of the car, we saw the plane taking off over our heads, right? Right. And he somehow he had misjudged. And so we had to be in Chicago the next day. And I remember that was the last plane of the day from Rhinelander, but there was yet a plane from Warsaw, right? So we jumped into the car, and I think that's Highway 17, maybe.
Yes.
Is that connects Rhinelander to
51.
51.
1751.
1751 connects Rhinelander to Warsaw, and we rushed right down, sped down there, and caught the plane, that last plane out of Warsaw. Another David asked me a question about the Mishlachat, the sending of organized groups of Israeli staff from Israel, and we really owe that to an Israeli diplomat, a fellow by the name of Chaim Zohar. Chaim Zohar worked in the office of the Rosh HaMemshalah in Jerusalem, that is in the Prime Minister's office. And he was a very good personal friend of Ramah people in Jerusalem, especially Jerry Abrams, Rabbi Jerome Abrams, who was one of our directors. And Chaim Zohar discussed this. It was his idea that he always talked to the Ramah people, and he said that this would be an important thing for the state of Israel, that they should send officially a delegation, mishlachat, a delegation, to work in the camps. And so, as a result of Chaim Zohar's idea, the Mishlachat program was established. It's interesting that it was established initially in the Prime Minister's office of Israel, though later it was transferred, where I still believe it is, within the Jewish agency, right? Now, I have one very strong memory of the Mishlachat, and that was in the year 1968. I mean, it was it's one of the most joyous occasions I remember in the history of the camp. You'll remember that at the beginning of June 1968, began the 6-day, 7-day war. 67, excuse me. 67, the 6-day war. And of course, all of our shlichim who were scheduled to come, I was director of the camp, but all the shlichim who were scheduled to come were young people of military age. And so it was really, I mean, and of course they were people who filled key positions in the camp. And we were, I mean, what was going to happen? Are we going to lose all of these staff members? And none of them, because even after the war ended, the war was right at the beginning of the month of June, but the government was not giving permission to people of military age to leave Israel. And so finally, after the camp season began, in the first week of the season, permission was given for those shlichim to leave Israel to come to the camp. And I remember they arrived while we were in dinner in the dining room in camp, and it was the most joyous occasion that I can recall. When they came in, we sang all kinds of songs. And I think that that was the occasion on which they taught us Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, which was the song of the Six-Day War. That's when that song was introduced. It was a wonderful occasion. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about the Ramah Committee. I had never, until I took on my work with Ramah, I began, my first summer was the summer of 1960, so I began working in the fall of 1959. Is that right, Mayor? Yeah? And I really met a very wonderful group of people. Among them, I mentioned Louis Weiner, Joe Levine, Sam Wolberg, Charlie Olaf. These people were Charlie Olaf was the treasurer of the Hall Printing Company, and Sam Olaf owned a large manufacturing company of manufactured pinball machines, I remember. And of course, Joe Levine was Federal Screw Products, you know. And it impressed me greatly that these men, right, no women, that these men were so dedicated to the idea of Camp Ramah, and they had never, and it wasn't that they